Scientists are always similar in every country. They are always curious people, and they don't want to stop, or they don't want to sit. Generally, scientists have only one religion, and that is science.
Our religion never contradicts with science. In fact, it is very much positive towards science. I can say that there is a duty that I should contribute towards science.
The first ayah or the first verse of Qur'an that came from God, it was Iqra, read, study. So I think that's an example enough for every Muslim to know what God really tells us in Islam.
The views of young scientists from Pakistan and Turkey on the role that religion plays in their work. Across the Islamic world, science and Islam are both in flux. As I've discovered throughout this series, interest and investment in science are on the up. Yet as science grows, it's running into new kinds of problems, of poor standards in primary and secondary education, of doing research in an age of terrorism, and the evergreen problem of inadequate funding. Science in the past has been restricted to people like me, children of professional parents who've been able to live and study abroad. But a scientific career now is open to a much bigger cross-section of the community, a population that sees religion as the backbone of daily life. And this is going to have implications for both science and religion. Taner Edis is a physicist born in Turkey, now working at Truman State University in Missouri.
What we have in the Muslim world right now is no single point of view about science. It's actually rather chaotic and fragmented. And people are trying to assemble these fragments of religious points of view and fragments of modern points of view, often borrowed from the West, and try and integrate them and construct a way of looking at the world that is both religiously satisfying and scientifically productive. And this has turned out to be a very difficult task.
One of the problems is the place of science in society. How is science perceived nowadays? I fear that there is, one, a huge misunderstanding, huge lack of understanding of what modern science really is, and two, there is huge distrust for certain conservative viewpoints towards science.
Nidal Gassoum, an astrophysicist from Algeria, based at the American University of Sharjah near Dubai. I want to explore what's behind these scientific misunderstandings and how faith and science interact. I'll be speaking to scientists who are practicing Muslims, both in Islamic countries and in Western Europe. The writer Zia Sardar began his working life as a physicist and as a long-time observer of science in the Muslim world.
There has never been a moment when I thought there's no connection between science and religion. For me, there was an intimate relationship. And I think that intimate relationship comes from the Qur'an itself. If the Qur'an insists that the believers, that the readers, observe, reflect, think, pursue, engage in empirical work, study nature, then it's asking them to do science in that sense. So for me, there was never a division that this bit of my mind is religion and this bit of my mind is science. In fact, when I started reading around and I discovered that in Western civilization, there was this conflict between science and religion, and two were, like fuming bulls in a boxing ring. I found that picture very, very strange. I couldn't believe it. As far as I was concerned, my religion motivated me to do science.
Science and Islam interacted and came together just through my engagement with the Qur'an, my prolonged contact with the Qur'an. One can't fail to notice and be moved by the innumerable verses in the Qur'an that encourage reflection, pondering, contemplation, and observation of the natural phenomena, and to comprehend, to understand the phenomena as signs, ayat, of the creator of all of that phenomena, of God. So, even a cursory engagement with the Qur'an, it's clear, there's a message there. The message is get out there and find God in nature.
Mahbub Ghani, lecturer in electronic engineering at King's College in London. Many Muslim scientists cite the Qur'an as a source of inspiration, but sacred texts can be read in many ways, and a different method of reading the Qur'an has become popular in Muslim societies, and it goes something like this. The Qur'an is the word of God, and God has prior knowledge of everything. So, if the Qur'an contains descriptions of natural phenomena, these will be accurate in the scientific sense, because God can't be wrong. Many scientists are now concerned that this is contributing to a poor grasp of the scientific method. Pervez Hoodboy, a professor of physics at Qu'ran University in Islamabad and at MIT in America, is a well-known critic of science in the Muslim world. He began exploring the relationship between science and Islam in the 1980s.
I was appalled by how little science exists in Muslim countries and the fact that it's not growing. And secondly, that a bizarre new apology for science was coming up in Pakistan. There were many Islamic science conferences in which the most bizarre theories were being propounded. For example, the chairman of my department, he had a theory by which he predicted the speed at which heaven was receding from earth based upon his understanding of the Qur'an. He used Einstein's theory of relativity in a way that I can only call bizarre. There was another very highly placed member of the Atomic Energy Commission. He put forward the idea that we could solve Pakistan's energy problems by simply capturing genies. And these are just a few examples. There were lots and lots. And in fact, even today, you'll find this kind of Islamic science all over the place.
There is this huge theory, quote unquote, this idea that there is a lot of science, scientific discoveries, scientific facts, scientific even inventions that can be found explicitly or implicitly in the Quran. And people come and say, no, we can find the speed of light, we can find pulsars, we can find black holes. And I'm not exaggerating, I'm taking examples that I can find you references for. Somebody made a calculation from verses, combining them like equations, and came up with the age of the Earth and the age of the universe, with 6, 7 significant digits. It's extraordinary. And so this whole attitude of what is science? How do we pursue science? How do we find out things? Where do facts come from? How do we know that they are facts? How do we ascertain knowledge? All of this is a huge, huge confusion in the Arab Muslim world today, I have to say.
Astrophysicist Nidal Gassoum. The trend is known in Arabic as ijaz, or the search for the scientific miracles of the Qur'an. Ironically, we owe its popularity to a book that was published in 1976 by Maurice Bucaille, a surgeon from France who was then working in Saudi Arabia. The book was called The Bible, the Qur'an and Science. It compared what each of the sacred texts has to say about natural events. And to the delight of Muslims, he wrote, "The Qur'an most definitely did not contain a single proposition at variance with the most firmly established modern knowledge." The book was a bestseller, and 3 decades later it still is. Only now, with the advent of digital communication, Bucaille's original idea seems to have taken on a life of its own.
I come across this day in and day out. I have to confront it with students and sometimes even colleagues who bring stuff to me, who send it to me by email. It is unfortunately a very popular idea. The number of books, the number of TV shows, the number of little videos that you can find on the internet, the web pages, is absolutely astounding. So in terms of popularity, it is the most popular cultural trend nowadays in the Arab Muslim world.
The sheer size of the market for ijaz literature means that today it's a very profitable industry, with dedicated publishers all over the world. Of course, followers of all religions want to believe that theirs is the one true path to God, but proving religion through the medium of science is an innovation which Muslims seem to have made their own. Zia Sardar.
I think this is, it has 2 dimensions. One is that because religion in Muslim societies is so mythologized, so uncritical, the approach to science then becomes very uncritical, and therefore all this miracle stuff then becomes a kind of a natural thing for many Muslim societies to do. But also, I think there's one important factor here, is that at this moment in time, the Muslim societies are intellectually in an abysmal position. And they know that they are intellectually in an abysmal position. And they also know that science is a route to power and prestige. So all this scientific miracle stuff then serves as a psychotherapy. So if you feel that you are inferior in relation to the rest of the world, you need to find something that makes you feel better, makes you feel superior. And then finding all these scientific discoveries in the Quran, makes people feel superior. Now, there really is, we got there first because it's in the Quran, as it were. in that sense. It's a very kind of modern phenomenon, and it's essentially to provide people with some sort of intellectual comfort.
Where could this lead to, this kind of thinking? Apart from the fact that it might create bad scientists,
I think
what else would it do?
It could lead to deep ignorance. It could lead to totally a deep ignorance, and it could lead to a even worse form of stagnation. If you believe that all science is in the Qur'an, then there's no need to do any kind of science at all. And then you say to your children, well, why do you want to study science? I mean, it can have, I think it can have quite profound consequences. It's a very, very dangerous movement.
It's useless. It's useless for learning science. It's useless for learning religion, because if you attempt to understand the Quran only in the light of science, you are losing the purpose of religion. You are losing the spiritual prospect. That's bad science, and that's bad religion. And there's a lot of work to do to explain to people that it's not the traditional way of seeing things in the Islamic world.
Bruno Guidardoni is the director of the observatory at Lyon in France. A convert to Islam, he's become an important voice in debates on science and religion worldwide. For him, the key to countering the influence of Ijaz literature is to see both science and religion as mutually reinforcing.
I became interested by science very early in my life. I think when I was a child, I remember how my father showed me the starry sky, for instance. It's a very strong impression. And after studies at the University of Paris, I chose astronomy as one of the major fields of science, the one which allows us to address really big questions. My father and my mother were Christians. They were non-practicing Christians, actually. And I did not receive any kind of religious education. But quite early, and very much at the same time as my interest in science began to grow, I became aware that I had interest for big issues, let's say, nature, reality, the meaning of our lives, things like that. But it took time for me to discover religions. I had a 2-year stay in Morocco, and I felt very attracted by Islam at that time. And later on, when I came back to Europe, I began a practicing Muslim 22 years ago. And very much at the same time as I became a professional astrophysicist. So at the beginning, at least the two ways, the two quests were parallel. But after a few years, I realized that I had to find the articulation between the two paths. And I became interested in the dialogue between science and religion.
Bruno is among a growing number of scientists in both the Islamic world and the West who are beginning to confront issues such as Ijaz, as well as another controversial area, the place of evolution in Islamic thought and the rise of creationism. Salman Hamid, lecturer in science and religion at Hampshire College, Massachusetts.
Scientists in the Muslim world, or scientists in general, have an important role to shape debates on scientific issues in the Islamic world. For example, the ideas of whether evolution is compatible with religion or not, that debate has not yet taken place. But now is the time when we have education levels that are rising, we have access to the internet, and we are also hearing about the evolution-creation controversies in the US, that these issues are now bringing evolution to the forefront. But at the present time, the creationists in the Muslim world are more organized. At the present time, their voices are the more dominant one. But scientists should step in. They can come in and present the scientific argument behind it, and also in shaping the debate which respects science.
As with evangelical branches of Christianity, many Muslims have embraced creationism with energy and zeal. For Tanner Edis, the growth of Islamic creationism is an inevitable result of the challenge to traditional ideas from science and technology.
I think creationism as a pseudoscience is something that appears only when people think that evolution and a modern scientific outlook in education is making enough of an inroad that it threatens traditional religious points of view. You have people who are a strong constituency for creationism precisely because they live a modern, not a traditional life, precisely because technology is very important to their lives. And this means they go around looking for ways to try and harmonize science and religion. And creationism actually work for people because if you believe in it, you can say that, hey, science and religion are in perfect harmony.
In the past, Islam's scientists had few problems with new knowledge overturning received ideas. A spherical Earth was accepted without question, as was the idea of a universe with the sun at its centre. So why is creationism such a big draw in the 21st century, when the world scientific community is convinced by evolution? Nidal Gessoum thinks it could have something to do with the fact that modern science is seen as displacing any need for God.
I have no doubt in my mind that the reasons why evolution is so widely rejected in the Arab Muslim world is because they have read and seen, listened to people expound on the atheistic consequences, so-called atheistic consequences of evolution. We need to explain to people that there are equally numerous scientists who will show you that there is no necessary rejection of God or of religion in the evolutionary paradigm. This is our challenge, that we need to counter impressions that evolution is materialistic or atheistic.
Many scientists, of course, many leading scientists are atheist or agnostic, and that comes across very strongly in some of our scientific courses and lectures at university, etc. There seems to be no room for God, or the divine, or the sacred, or the absolute. And as a young student, it can be quite difficult to reconcile that, especially when many of my friends thought that things like the Big Bang Theory or the theory of evolution rule out God, for example, or disprove the existence of God, or make God very unlikely. And that's a very common attitude amongst scientists. And if you're not firm in your faith and in your understanding of how these things can be reconciled, that can be a struggle. So, I spent, like probably most believing scientists, many years struggling with these issues.
Osama Hassan works in artificial intelligence at Middlesex University and is also a part-time imam in East London. He knows exactly what it's like to be a scientist in an environment that sees no reason to believe. For Osama, cosmology and evolution were topics he had to work through and explore.
Well, firstly about theories which sometimes cast doubt on very traditional or literal interpretations of scripture. And when you're brought up in a very traditional fashion, believing those stories, then science can confound that. So the way I learned to deal with that was to move away from very literal understandings of some of the scriptural passages. And that was reinforced by the fact that we found many ancient commentators did the same thing. And so that's always served as an inspiration, that people have been on this path before and had no problems with these issues. And I suppose I was helped here by the only people at Cambridge, my undergrad venue at the time, the only people who were really reconciling these different areas were actually committed Christians. So I learned from the books of John Polkinghorne and some of his students. They too were monotheists, were also scientists. But once you have a firm understanding, it enriches your faith as well as your science.
Osama's journey highlights that many of the issues confronting Muslim scientists are common to other faiths too. And, as science plays an ever greater role in society, debates and discussions will continue. Not least because it's not just science which is becoming more prominent, so too is religion. Nidal Gessoum.
There is no doubt that over the past 2 or 3 decades there has been this huge revival of religion practically everywhere in the world, but especially strongly in the Islamic world. People are going back to religion, practicing, believing, reading the Qur'an, going back to the literature, the ancient literature, and so on. But what is most disconcerting is the fact that this going back to religion has meant going back to a certain literalistic interpretation of the scriptures.
For scientists such as Pervez Hoodboy, students who hang on every word of scripture lack the apparatus needed for scientific excellence, the ability to be critical, creative, and to ask questions that might upset received ideas.
If one wants scientific progress, I believe that one has to create the kind of mindset which wants science. That is our battle over here, because although many students, many teachers, in fact 99% of them will say that yes, they want science, yet there is a reluctance to accept the implications. Now let me give you an example of that. In 2005, there was this terrible earthquake. It killed 90,000 people. The general belief in all the earthquake areas was that this was the wrath of God, which had visited them for their sins. This was a view that was propagated constantly without anyone to challenge it.
And so, what did you do, or what did you say then in response to that?
So, when I put this before my students, I got stunned disbelief. They said, but it is in the Qur'an that earthquakes happen to punish people. And so we went on in this, and both of my classes were taken up arguing. At the end, 5 students came to me from my first class, and they said, sir, we agree with you, but we were afraid to speak. Now, if this is what happens, if this is how deeply religion impacts upon their thinking, then it's clear that they haven't imbibed the scientific method. And so, yes, it's easy to remember formulas and to even work out a few problems, but that's not science for me.
Pervez, in your view, do you think it's the role of science and the scientist to challenge religion?
Well, no, but I do think that when science is under attack and science is misrepresented, then scientists should speak up.
And yet, I wonder if this concern is a generational thing, or if indeed it's something to do with class and with westernization. In common with the Islamic world's scientific elite, Pervez Hoodboy, Nidal Gassoum and myself all come from a generation who have studied and worked in the West. Now contrast this with their students, with roots in rural areas and whose parents may never have been to school. They work hard at their science and are also devout in religion, and they can talk with confidence about both. Kamal Zehra, chemistry PhD student in Karachi.
As long as you live in Pakistan, you are in limelight. And we should be very clear about this point, because as long as we are talking, there will be a solution. So I think in my life, religion does have a very important role. In my lab, religion does have a very important role, but not that Islam that is being projected on media these days. We are also presenting Islam. I'm wearing a scarf. I'm working in my lab. So I don't think that Islam is an issue that could cause hurdles in development of our country or in development of or betterment of mankind. It's an accelerator. It's not a hurdle at all.
So how can you give us an example of how something about your religious faith helps you to accelerate your science?
Islam tells us to work for mankind, to work for betterment of mankind, whether it's in lab, whether it's in business, whether it's in your home, whether it's outside on the street, everywhere. So I think it plays a really good major role in development of any nation if you take your faith from a religion like this, like Islam. But here people are exploiting it, have been exploiting it for political purposes and everything. So I think that's why the situation has come this far.
So yes, there are many more beards and headscarves in labs and lecture theatres compared with a decade ago. But perhaps we shouldn't be too surprised by this. As science opens up to attract a wider demographic, in a Muslim country, that's going to mean more practicing Muslims. These young Muslims are taking on careers in science at a critical time for the Islamic world. It'll be up to them to carry out the research, development and innovation which is so badly needed to bring forward economies. And it'll be up to them to test the claims of Ijaz literature and to debate with creationists. It's a process that the rest of the world is watching very closely indeed. Physicist Tanner Edis.
Right now, when I look at the Islamic world, I see a world that is undergoing some fairly rapid religious change. Sometimes we have the stereotype of Islam as a sort of monolithic, conservative, even fundamentalist way of being religious, but that's not quite true. Part of that comes about precisely because right now Muslims across the world are experimenting with different ways of being Muslim. And because of this environment of ferment and experimentation, it's quite possible that, say, a generation later, we are going to be looking at something very different. And if I have any hopes for the Muslim world to come to a better accommodation with science, it perhaps has to be in this environment of experimentation we have right now.
Much is riding on the young shoulders of this new generation. Yet they seem comfortable straddling science and religion and mixing both worlds at the same time. This they share with Islam's greatest minds, scientists such as Hassan ibn al-Haytham from 11th century Cairo. He famously wrote, "Whosoever seeks the truth will not proceed by studying the writings of his predecessors and by simply accepting his opinions of them. He must examine texts with the greatest precision and question them from all angles."
Science has given to me the sense of awe. For me, as a Muslim believer, what science is telling me about the cosmos is marvelous. Now, as a scientist, I think that religion helps me to keep faith in reason and science. Everything is coherent because of God, because the world is God created. And it's a strong help when I have moments in which I feel I do not understand anything. It's too complicated, galaxies are too complicated. There is this idea given by my faith that everything has its meaning in the broad picture.
There are a lot of sayings of Islam who say that if someone is working on some specific concept for the betterment of mankind or finding cure for a disease or anything like that, that's even better than just praying in a mosque. So I think if I were sitting in a mosque for one complete day and I were sitting in my lab, and for that same complete day my lab is going to be a lot more important, or that time is going to be a lot more important in the eyes of God.